Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carrie, and I am part of the programming team here at the library. And it is my pleasure to welcome you to tonight's event, Turning Pain into Purpose, an evening with walk-on author Stephen Panus. Drawing upon wisdom, leadership, parenthood, and a 35-year career as a sports marketing executive, author and local Southportian Stephen Panus shares his journey of turning pain into purpose, overcoming adversity and finding strength in vulnerability after enduring every parent's most horrific nightmare, the loss of a child. Walk On is an inspiring and emotionally powerful story which transcends grief, loss, and love and provides anyone suffering from any form of adversity, struggle, or hardship with hope. Joining Stephen in conversation tonight is Westport's own Lindsay Czarniak, an Emmy Award-winning broadcaster and good friend of Stephen's, who will lead the program as well as facilitate a Q&A after the conversation. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Stephen and Lindsay.
Thank you, Carrie. That was so kind. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And a couple of housekeeping notes. We are going to have a Q&A afterwards. And if you do have a question at that point, you can go and stand right in front of that step and repeat there. There are also books. So Stephen's book, you can get a copy of it in the back. And he's going to be signing those books. Did you know that?
I just found out.
Yeah, so this is great. But anyway, yes, please, and I encourage you to purchase this book because it's life-changing. It really is, and it certainly is impactful. So I am very excited to be here with Stephen. I mean, honestly, I think this is a huge honor because knowing you as a friend and a colleague first, but understanding what this book is about is just, I think it helps. I know it helps so many people. So to be able to share what I already know with all of you, it's so exciting. As a journalist, I was thinking about this today. I just came from my daughter's basketball practice, which was a disaster, and because she was doing back walkovers, but in basketball. Anyway, I was just thinking about, like, you don't get many opportunities like this where you're so excited to have the people that are in the audience really hear all the pieces of this and what you've learned. So this is awesome. So first, I'm going to brag about Stephen a little bit. He's an executive. He is a sports agent. He's now working with, he's the CEO of Twisted Hairs, which is, you described it as an advisory agency, right?
Correct, yep. Covering public relations, marketing, and media.
Yes, and so here you go. He's worked with Advocacy, with Kenny Mayne, who's one of my former colleagues at ESPN, and that's Elio Castroneves, who Stephen Panus got on Dancing with the Stars, and then he went on to win. So that's a very cool story.
Yeah, he's a great guy, Elio.
What do you remember of that event and watching it play out that way?
The banana suit sticks out, the yellow suit.
Did you tell him to wear that?
No, I didn't coordinate the clothes. That was not...
I know Stephen, though. I came to know him just a couple years ago because he gave me an opportunity to cover horse racing, which was interesting to me at the time because my dad was a journalist covering horse racing, so it actually meant a lot more to me than just being offered another gig. So I got a chance to work with Stephen as he led America's Best Racing, which is owned by the Jockey Club. And what I learned of Stephen as a leader and as an executive quickly was the fact that he was extremely dialed in. Everyone respects him. He's very kind, he is patient, but he's such a visionary. Like, you are a tremendous entrepreneur, I mean, clearly, to accomplish all of this, but also the way that Stephen leads is with kindness and really with compassion and listening. And one of the things that I will always take with me from working with you at that time is how you can identify when it's time for things to evolve and how you can lead people and organizations through things that are unexpected. So I think that's really awesome. And when I think about it in the way of your book, I didn't even know about Stephen's story until maybe a few months into working with him and understanding what that has meant to you in terms of putting this out, but also just the journey that you've been through with your family has been really special to understand and to learn. So I welcome you, Stephen. Thank you for being here and for sharing this. And I'd love to start with what you want to share at the forefront, a little bit about where you're from, why you're doing this, and what's most important to you.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay, for the kind words, and thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight on a rainy night. I was born in upstate New York, Rochester. Spent my first 18 years there, then I fled to the South. I went to the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks, and then subsequently went to the Loyola University School of Law in New Orleans, and launched my career down there, fell in love down there with my wife, Kelly, my beautiful wife, and our elder son, Jake, was born there in 2004. Moved around a little bit, Colorado, then Las Vegas, and that's where Liam was born in 2009, our youngest son. And we moved back to Fairfield, this area of the Northeast, in 2010. And yeah, that's our family.
You dedicated this book to your son, Liam.
I did, yeah. Liam lost his best friend, and he was 11 years old when it happened, and my heart still aches for him. I'll never forget the first night we tried to go to bed, if you could even sleep, and I don't think I did, but Liam got in bed with us, and he said, "What happens if something happens to you guys? I'm all alone." And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. But Liam's doing great. He's a sophomore at Ludlow High School in Fairfield. He throws the javelin in track, and he's kind of following his brother's path there. He goes to the Bridgeport Aquamarine School in the morning, then Ludlow later in the morning and afternoon, and Liam's just a really emotionally mature, developed young man. I'm super proud of him.
And I mean, to give you an idea too about, Stephen, we talked about him as the worker, but also him as a dad. There's a part, it's not giving away too much in this book, but where you go into how when you found out that Jake was coming along, you went to your boss at the time and said, "Would you consider letting me," and it was at a law firm.
Correct.
Right? He said, "Would you consider letting me work a 4-day week?" And you were young.
Yeah.
You are young, but you were very young. But I mean that, and am I right that you did that because you saw that you wanted to be a really involved, and that's the kind of dad that you wanted to be?
Correct, yeah, I decided to go off partner track and just be a staff attorney, and boy, am I forever grateful for that decision, because I was very involved in Jake's life, and from the get-go, being home Friday, not working on Friday, and yeah, it was special, and it's amazing how kind of life works out like that, where you make a decision, you don't always understand why, and the answer's provided much later.
Tell me about Jake. What do you want people to know about? What kind of kid was he?
Jake was unique. He was one in a million type kid. He, as you can see, he had beautiful curly hair, blonde afro, we called it. He definitely got the hair gene. But Jake was a magnetic personality. He always had a smile on his face. His energy was electric. It was palpable. It was contagious. He was a gifted athlete. He played many sports, but he was playing lacrosse and football in high school at Ludlow. And he was a leader that people gravitated toward. And but his true superpowers was that he was uniquely authentic, and that he spread joy everywhere he went, and had this innate ability to lift up others.
Give me an example of what you saw.
Yeah, so I share a story in the book about, we received a card after Jake passed from a young girl who was in Jake's youth group at our church. And they weren't close friends, but they were in the same group. And she shared how Jake had left a real impression on her, and how he included her in one moment where she had never really gone to see her older sister play volleyball because she was shy, an introvert, didn't really know where to fit in. And so she finally got up the muster to go one day, and she was there sitting in the stands by herself, and in walked Jake with a couple friends in tow, because Jake did not travel alone. He was always in a pack. And Jake looked around, scanned the gym, and he just beelined it with his buddies right over to her, sat down next to her, immediately greeted her, included her in with his buddies. And she just relayed how all her nerves and anxiety and everything just melted in that moment, just the way Jake included her. And that's his authenticity, that's who he was. And I think he knew instinctively that she needed to be supported that day, and he showed up.
And he showed up. And I love to, and we'll get to this, but that's something that you've shared with me, is just showing up, and how much showing up has meant to you too in the grieving process. I know it's painful, but I would like to have you explain what happened to Jake.
Yeah, so in early August of 2020, Jake asked if he could go away with his girlfriend and her family for a weekend getaway to Block Island. We initially said no, and then some of you might recall there was a microburst storm that came through Westport and Fairfield, and it took down some trees and some power lines. We lost power, so now we were without power, and Jake had a way of wearing us down as well, but we reflected and said, you know what, it's better that he goes somewhere where, you know, he's gonna enjoy himself. We don't have power here. So we changed our minds, we let him go. The mom of the girlfriend texted my wife. The last text was, nothing to worry about. I'll be watching the kids. She told us it would be safe family fun. They would be, you know, walking to the beach, playing board games, getting ice cream, all that stuff. And so Jake left on Friday, August 7th. And 2 days later, on Sunday, the 9th of August, just after 12 noon-ish, we got a phone call from the mom. There had been an accident. Jake was injured. Those were the only details she had. And Kelly quickly packed an overnight bag. I grabbed Liam. We got into our car and began to speed towards Rhode Island. And we were about 12 minutes into the drive on I-95 when Kelly's phone rang again. It was connected to the car speaker system, and a doctor from Rhode Island introduced himself, and then he paused and he said, "I'm sorry, I just pronounced your son dead." And then everything went black. Kelly screamed the most piercing guttural sound I've ever heard, and I was flying at the time down the left lane. I had to get over and get off the highway, and we did. And later that night, the details of the accident surfaced, and Jake was a passenger in a vehicle that was operated recklessly, went off the road, crashed. The driver was charged with reckless driving and driving under the influence. The driver was Jake's teenage girlfriend. She was 1 year older. They had only been dating less than 6 weeks. So, and we later learned too that the mother had stuffed 6 other boys into that vehicle and sent them on their way. So needless to say, there was a lot to worry about, and nobody was watching the kids.
What do you remember after the fact? What is it that sticks out to you most in those, I guess, the near future after it happened?
Disbelief, traumatic, shock. It felt like you weren't even in this world anymore. You're just floating. I couldn't feel anything. I really couldn't formulate a thought or think. I didn't sleep or eat for a while. Our life was blown to smithereens, and it felt like someone reached into my chest and ripped out my beating heart. It was life-altering. It destroyed our family for a good many years. We're 4 years and 4 months into this. It's a life sentence. There's life with Jake, and there's this new unwanted life without him. I wouldn't wish it upon any soul.
Did you set out to write the book? What was the beginning of how this came to be?
I started to write to survive. I needed a place to put my feelings. I was filled with anger and bitterness, anguish, frustration, and certainly rage against our circumstances. And I started to write a goodbye letter to Jake. And it took a long time. It was off and on because it was incredibly painful. And then one day, I looked at Liam, and as I mentioned, he was 11 years old at the time. I was 52, and I thought, I'm struggling. How is an 11-year-old boy supposed to handle this, process and cope, and really understand what's happened, and that his brother's never coming back? So I asked Liam to go upstairs and get his buck knife and meet me outside, and he did. And we walked across our property to an old tree, and I asked him to carve off a swath of bark. And he carved a little square. He looked at me and he said, "Now what, Dad?" And I said, "Now we're gonna watch this tree regrow new bark and heal itself. It's gonna look different, it's gonna feel different. It's not gonna be the same. It'll be a different color maybe, but this tree has the capability to heal itself. And just like this tree, we have that same capability. And we're not going to be the same. I'm not going to lie to you. We're never going to be the same. But we will find a way to walk on, and we'll do it together. And as Rumi said, the wound is where the light enters. And I wanted Liam to believe in me, but more importantly, in himself in this process, and that it was going to take collective healing to get through it.
Something that Stephen is sort of known for now, and I know the story's been shared, but is that when both of his boys were younger, it started in elementary school with the Post-it notes?
Yeah, when Jake was about 5 and was old enough to read a little bit.
Yeah, so he would write Post-it notes every day and leave them, and I just, God, this, it's so, I'm sure that's relatable to a lot of people that are here and watching also. Tell me that story. How did that come to be? Because as you're describing that about the bark, I'm thinking, how did you think about that in the moment, and what a great lesson analogy, but you were doing that all along, and I know you still do it.
Yeah.
With Liam.
Yeah, so I wanted to impart critical values and traits into my boys, and I came from a background of sports, so certainly kind of like coach speak, if you will, but they covered a lot of things that I thought were important in life, including non-negotiable fundamental values. And I wanted them to, I wanted to impart wisdom and inspiration into their developing heart, mind, and soul. And they were quotes from known and unknown personalities, my own thoughts from time to time. And I'd put them on his lunch bag or at the kitchen island, and he'd read them, or I'd read them to him before school. And then it continued with Liam. And it was a fun thing to do, but when Jake died, everything you believe in is thrown out the window. It's upended, your value system, your belief system, your faith. You question everything. And I found myself having to go back and revisit a lot of these quotes and find meaning in them. And if there was true veracity in it, things that I had modeled for my boys no longer felt right. And so I had to make sense of them, and that really became the genesis of Walk On, is revisiting those quotes and then applying them to my new life.
Can you share what the early days and months of grief were like for you and your family?
They were dark, really, really dark. Liam and Kelly at different points didn't want to live, and I certainly understood that, but I was fighting for the collective survival of my family, and the last thing I could afford was losing anybody else. And I'm not gonna lie, there were nights when I would not sleep, but I would put my head down on the pillow and I said to myself, I'm okay if I don't wake up tomorrow. Grief is just, it's fierce, it's relentless, it's my shadow now. And when you lose a child suddenly, he was 16 years old, you don't just cry, you weep until your bones rattle. It was devastating, and like I said, it's every day. There's Jake lived in every time zone. He played travel sports. He had friends across this county, let alone the country, and he left a pretty big footprint. So there's a lot of reminders and triggers, and they're good and bad, but everything now is bittersweet, is the easiest way to say it.
Did you seek out grief counseling, and did you find it effective?
Big time, yeah. I don't think I'd be sitting here if I didn't have the therapy that I've had with Mitch Davidowitz, our therapist. He's based out of Boston. We found him about 30 days or so into losing Jake, and through friends, and he's done nothing but grief therapy for over 40 years, internationally and nationally. He's renowned. He studied under Ram Dass, so we kind of shared that Buddhist philosophical spirit, and he's been great. He really is a lifesaver. I would recommend anyone to get therapy if they're dealing with grief, and certainly acute grief. It's so necessary. I needed someone to talk to, someone to bounce off my darkest thoughts and help me understand, because your brain feels like all the wires have been pulled out, and you really struggle to process. And our brains are hardwired to seek out logical reasoning. So I was chasing my tail, like, how did this happen? Why did that happen? It felt so personal. And it really felt like aliens abducted him. One day Jake's here, and the next day he's not.
There's a story that you told about signs, and I know that you said that Jake is all around all the time, that there are signs, but because now you have Liam, you also have a daughter that joined your family through the foster care system, April.
That's right.
I would love to have you share that story with this group, because I think it's just absolutely profound, and it begins with the story of what you said that Jake would say when he was a little kid.
Yeah, so we lived in Las Vegas, Nevada at one point, and Jake was he was 3, 4, and 5. He was at a Montessori school, and he used to tell his teachers and his friends that he had a sister, and he was adamant. And to the point where the grandmothers on both sides were like, you gotta stop him from lying. And we're like, he has a creative imagination. But he really meant it. And when we asked him, he would say, because I have a sister. Well, life moved on, and we moved back here. And a year before Jake died, he was a freshman at Ludlow. He had just come back from a church mission trip to South Dakota, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. And I happened to be at Saratoga Racetrack with a friend who also had a son in that same mission trip, who was a few years older than Jake, but they bonded and hung out a lot. And the dad asked me—
And real quick to insert, you guys just kind of were like, oh, this is just a little kid thing. He's just making up like an imaginary friend.
Totally.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so Jake's 15 years old, and this dad comes up to me and says, hey, can I ask you a question? It's a little bit awkward. I'm like, you can ask me anything. And he's like, did you and Kelly have previous marriages and then you kind of combined families, Brady Bunch style? And I'm like, no, why? Why do you ask? He goes, well, because Jake was telling Parker that he has a sister. And I laughed and I said, wow, I haven't heard that in years. And after Jake died, Kelly said, when the time is right, Jake is gonna send someone to us.
That's him telling your friend's son, is that right? Or reading a book? Or
Oh,
was that
he's
a
reading a book to one of the Lakota children.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Keep going.
Kelly asked me to kind of put out the word that to our church and to others, if anybody ever heard of a child in need that needed a home and love, that to please call us. And we started to look into adoption programs. We started to look into the foster program as well. And in the early winter of 2023, we had just flown out of the country to get out of the cold weather and just treat ourselves, which we had never really done. And we're like, let's go somewhere super warm and exotic and just completely check out. So we ended up in Barbuda, which is just off the coast of Antigua. And we literally just landed, and I got a text from our minister saying, there's this young woman. She's a talented student athlete. She comes from a tough background. She's been homeless since October, and she needs a home, and she's being placed in the foster care system. Would you guys be interested? And I wrote, yes. And then I went and talked to Cal because she manifested this, certainly. And we came home from that trip, a week or so later, thinking that there was probably like a 75% chance that this is going to work out and that she may be coming to our house in a week or 10 days. But we knew we were going to have to tackle Jake's room, which we had never touched. Everything sat exactly the same. So we came home and tackled Jake's room, and we moved a lot of the Jake items and tried to feminize it a little bit. And 24 hours later, they called and said, we're bringing her over. And this beautiful young woman walked into our house. Her name is April. And she had a backpack. That was all she had. And I took
Very
her,
talented athlete.
I took her upstairs after the social workers left, and I was showing her the room, and I was opening the drawers, and I told her, I said, you can put your clothes in here, make yourself at home. And she's like hesitant, and rightfully so. She said, how long am I gonna be here? And I said, as long as you want. And Kelly came up, and so I gave them some space, and she asked, whose room is this? Is this a guest room? And Kelly's like, no, it's our late son's room. And we had spoken to April in advance when we were in Barbuda once, and we confided to her that we had lost a son. So we wanted her to know that she was coming into a house dealing with some trauma as well, and that she'd be supported. And so then April said to Kelly, what was your son's name? Because we hadn't revealed that. And Kelly said, Jake. and she had heard the social worker say our last name, leaving goodbye, Mr. and Mrs. Panus, and April was like, Jake Panus? I knew of him. And we were like, what? And April's a lefty, Jake's a lefty. April has curly hair, Jake had curly hair, student athletes. She does things and says things that compel Kelly and I to look at each other and say, that's exactly what Jake would have said. Are you kidding me?
And that's not all. And this is Liam, right?
Yeah, that's
Liam and April.
that's a month after she was in our home. That's April with Liam and Kelly and myself. And then I was digging through some old boxes, and I found a drawing that Jake had made when he was little. And in true Jake fashion, he drew his sister, and he labeled her, and he has her holding Liam's hand, and it actually looks like April. So Kelly was right. When the time was right, Jake was going to send someone to us. Little did we know he was going to send his sister. So it's a pretty amazing story, and one that we all have immense gratitude for, because I honor that not every family that loses a child gets another child delivered to them like this. And she's a beautiful young woman. She was recruited by Army and Navy for rugby, offered both, turned them down, and she's currently at Bucknell University on a full academic scholarship. She has a very bright future. She's incredibly driven.
Yeah, Stephen shared that story with me, and I said, you have to share that. I mean, I know that you know and think that that's not a coincidence, but I just think that's so incredibly powerful. Why would you say having a purpose in life and a meaning is so important to you now, and finding a purpose through the pain? What does that all mean to you?
Yeah, I think we all crave having a purpose behind the why, right? It's universal, and if you don't have that, you tend to be lost. You tend to be, amiss, lacking something. And I think we all probably have stopped at one point or another and said, "What gives my life meaning?" or "What is my purpose?" Mark Twain said, "The two most important days in life are the day you're born and the day you find out why." And for me, my purpose was always my career, as we talked about earlier, until 2004 when Jake was born. And I made that decision to not be a partner at the law firm and be home for Jake. And that was important to me. Probably subconsciously knew something, but I just wanted to be the best dad that I could be, and I knew that being a parent is similar to being on a team. You take on a responsibility much greater than your own self and your own interests. And it was pretty special, as I said, to be there for Jake in that way and have such an amazing relationship with him.
And so talk to me about the scholarships that you've created, because I think also so much of this is you have really found a way and are really only enhancing Jake's legacy with the things that you've created. And I know that that's intentional.
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, Jake went to the church mission trip to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in 2019, and he came home really moved by the experience. He wanted to help the kids. That was the first thing he said to me when I got off the bus. "Dad, we got to help these kids. They need a lot more." And he went there to teach them to read and math skills and crucial life skills, but also just to have fun with them. And Jake had plenty of joy and energy to go around, and he really bonded with the kids. But he came home equally upset with the inequalities that he witnessed and the discrepancies between how they were growing up in Pine Ridge and how he was growing up here in Fairfield. And he was committed to going back in 2020, couldn't wait. He wanted to really bring change to the children there. He talked about them a lot. And then COVID obviously canceled the trip, and Jake died 2 months later. So in the days after Jake passed, we were being inundated with flowers, and we recognized we didn't need any more, and we thought, what would Jake want? And Jake would want to help those kids. So we created the first scholarship. Initially, it was called the Jake Panus Memorial Scholarship, and it helps kids from a particular area on the reservation called Red Shirt Table who graduate from Red Cloud Indian School, gives them a full college scholarship. And the scholarship was later named, I'll back up. So that was the first scholarship. 2 days before Christmas, I received a phone call while I was away on a walk with Kelly to the beach, and I left my phone at home, and I came back and looked at the phone, and it had an 843 prefix, which is a Charleston, South Carolina prefix. And having gone to South Carolina, I thought, okay, it's one of my buddies calling to try to cheer me up at Christmas, because it was a pretty joyless time at our house. And I played the message, and lo and behold, it was the newly hired head football coach, Shane Beamer. He had just been hired 2 weeks prior. He certainly had much bigger priorities than reaching out to me. But there he was on the phone, and left his number, said to call him back. Liam and I called him back, and we talked, and he was great. There's just a sense of humanity that came through, was amazing. And Jake's dream school was the University of South Carolina. He wanted to follow in my footsteps, and so as his father, I felt a responsibility to make sure Jake got there. And after talking with Shane, I marinated on it, and I said, I think I have an idea. So I reached back out to Shane after the new year, and I said, what do you think about this idea for a walk-on scholarship? Shane's a former walk-on at Virginia Tech. He loved the idea, and we quickly worked with the athletic department to create the scholarship, raise the funds, and now there is an endowed scholarship there. We've given 4 scholarships out at the University of South Carolina to 4 walk-ons, and we've given 3 scholarships to 3 young Lakota women from Red Cloud School, so 7 in 4 years, and both scholarships will stand the test of time, and they're all about making sure that Jake's legacy of lifting up others and spreading joy endures forever.
That's so cool. And what also is something to note, I have friends who have a son at South Carolina who just said that he's aware of your son, right? Because they talk about it, because it's just that big a deal, what you've done for them. And speaking of that, we want to take a moment because we actually have a message from Shane. He really wanted to share something with you.
Stephen's work with his scholarship and our walk-on program has been so beneficial to our team. Walk-ons are special to all of us here at Carolina for what they mean to our program. And Stephen's work with his scholarship and our walk-on program has been so beneficial to our team. Walk-ons are special to all of us here at Carolina for what they mean to our program. And it's something that our players, obviously, they love being awarded a scholarship for their hard work. But when that scholarship has such special meaning like Stephen's does, it's extra special. And it's something that our guys are very proud of, and as they should be. Yeah, so I was hired as the head coach here at South Carolina back in December of 2020, and shortly thereafter I became aware of Stephen and his family and the tragedy that they had gone through very recently at that point. And as the dad of 3 myself, it hit me hard, and I just wanted to reach out to them as the new head coach at South Carolina to just tell them how sorry I was and that I was thinking of them, because I found out what a huge Gamecock fan Jake was, and what a Gamecock fan Stephen and the family are, and just certainly wanted them to know that I was thinking of them. I know that as the head football coach at a program like this, at a program in the SEC, you impact a lot of people, and I just wanted to reach out and let them know that I was thinking of them, and everything took off from there. I have so much respect for Stephen, for how he has taken just an unspeakable tragedy and turned it into a positive. The pain and the grief that he has and will always have, I can't imagine, but he has used it for good. He's allowed Jake's spirit to carry on, and he's making Jake proud with how he has continued to live his life. As he talks about in the book, I learned so much that I use as a coach here at Carolina, things that I read about and took and wrote down from the book as well, just words that Stephen wrote in that book as well. So he's taken that tragedy and turned it into a positive that's impacted not only me personally, but our football program and so many people across the world.
And he's a master of building camaraderie. I just thought that's what...
That's pretty cool. He is one of the most positive, optimistic people I've ever met in my life, and more importantly, he's just a great human being. Coincidentally, he's nominated now. He's a finalist for the National Coach of the Year.
It's incredible. And he won one of the biggest games recently. Yeah. And he's using your Post-it notes, apparently, right? No, but I think that's a point I wanted to ask you about, because being able to do what he described, flip a switch, not that anything ever goes away, the grief never leaves, but how did you do that? Was there a time when you and your family felt the grief shift, or when you realized that, okay, now we're at a point where we'll start to, I don't know, do outreach? How did that work for you guys?
Well, first, grief is an individual journey. So as much as Kelly and I and Liam shared this tragedy, we each processed it differently and coped differently. And so the timeline is different for everybody, despite sharing it, right? And so that somewhat complicates things at times. It makes it challenging. But we were committed to supporting each other through the process. When someone was down, the other tried to lift them up. So it was different. So I can only really speak to mine. And I was lost. I was a zombie, like I said, for year one. When Jake died, I took 8 weeks off from work, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. I couldn't function. And even when I returned, I was probably a fraction of who I was before. So it was probably late in year one, and I remember meeting with my therapist, who I met with weekly, sometimes twice a week, and telling him how I lacked purpose and meaning in my life. And it was really, I'd never been like that. I felt helpless. I wasn't hopeless, but I felt helpless. And also as a father, your job is to love and provide and protect your family. And we want to fix things, right? We want to solve problems. And I could not fix Kelly's grief. I could only sit with it. And it was really, really hard to see my wife in such anguish and pain on a level I'd never seen before, never care to see again. So I ended up reading a lot. And it's funny because they say that when you suffer acute trauma and shock like that, and that typically reading is not an activity that you gravitate toward because your brain just can't process and all that. But that was the one thing that seemed to work for me. It was a solve. I could just tuck myself in with a book, and I was on a spiritual quest. I wanted answers, even though I knew I wasn't going to get the answer of why did that happen. But there was other answers that I wanted about the universe on a larger scale, and life, and loss, and love, and grief. So I just started consuming books, and I ran across a quote from Aldous Huxley right before I left for South Carolina to award the first scholarship, and it said, "Experience isn't what happens to a man, it is what a man does with what happens to him." And that really resonated with me, and that kind of started a little bit of a pivot. I awarded the first scholarship at South Carolina on September, I think it was 21st, 2021, to a young long snapper named Matthew Bailey, great kid. And when it was announced and I was speaking in front of the whole team, he came up from his seat, and I saw the joy in his face and just ecstasy and gratitude, and I saw Jake in his face. And that was a real pivotal moment where I knew I left there, I was demolished emotionally, but I knew that helping others was my new purpose. And carrying Jake's love and light, I feel like I'm a vessel, and Jake just kind of comes through me and shares his love and light. And so that was kind of the first pivot. Then I happened upon a story about a young boy from Texas who was 17 years old. He misjudged the depth of a swimming pool. He dove in and he broke his neck and he was paralyzed. Well, they interviewed him 20 years later, so now he's 37. And he was asked how he overcame the adversity and the injury. And he said, "The accident broke my neck, it didn't break my spirit." He considered his life rich and abundant with meaning. And he went on to say, but for that accident and the suffering, all the growth that he had achieved would never have been possible. And I was like, wow. Yeah. And then my therapist recommended Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl's amazing book about chronicling his time as a Nazi concentration camp survivor during World War II. He witnessed his entire family murdered. And the most enduring insight from that book was that forces beyond our control can take away everything we possess except one thing, and that's our freedom to choose how we're going to respond. We can't control what happens to us in life, but we can always control what we feel and do about what happens to us. And that's where I felt like all those things coming together, I was at the same crossroads as Viktor Frankl and that young boy or man from Texas. And what was I going to do with my life? I could either be a victim or I could try to be the victor, if you will. And there's no victory in this, but I could either overcome this and find a way. And I decided to make adversity my teacher rather than a roadblock.
Wow, that's a great quote. How did you come up with the name Walk On? And I'm sorry if you've woven that and shared that somewhere in the mix.
No, I kind of drifted around it a little bit.
Yeah.
So, as I mentioned earlier, the first scholarship was named the Jake Panus Memorial Scholarship. We then named the second one the Jake Panus Walk On Scholarship, because most of us know in the sports student NCAA world, a walk-on athlete is a student athlete who doesn't get a scholarship, but they're on the team and they're trying hard to get a scholarship. They're usually smaller, they're usually maybe overlooked, underrated, diamonds in the rough. They just want to continue to play in the sport they love. And some of them are really good. And by walking on, they get discovered. And so we set that up so that we could award a student athlete at South Carolina who shared Jake's leadership qualities and his kindness and his sense of community, his grit. And when I went out and after awarding the first one at South Carolina, Liam and I went out to Pine Ridge and we awarded the first two scholarships there. And when I was talking with the Lakota administrators, they asked about the first scholarship or the second scholarship, and I told them the name Walk On, and they said, "Oh my God, that's so interesting, because we have another meaning for it." And I was like, "Really, what is it?" And they said that, well, in their culture, they believe that death is not the end point of a linear pathway, and that when we die, we walk on in our journey. And I was like, it was like an aha moment where the universe just brought it all together. And they insisted, and I certainly agreed, that we rename that scholarship the Walk On Scholarship too. So they both have the same name now, and they're changing lives, which is incredibly meaningful, because it means that people are saying Jake's name, like the folks here telling that story. That means so much. It allows me to take them to other places. I know that I get to mentor now kids who have similar dreams, not dissimilar from Jake, and each one of these recipients carries a part of Jake forward with them in their life. And to a bereaved father, that's incredibly meaningful.
I want to make sure that we have time for people that have questions, but I did want to ask you just, are there lessons that you've taken with you from this experience, from writing, from all of it, about grief, about life, things that you would love to share?
Yeah, I think we, and I say this, that we all suffer in some way, shape, or manner. And when adversity or hardship falls on us, we often feel alone in our circumstances. And I certainly did. But then you run a simple Google search and you realize, sadly, kids are dying all the time, and there's more parents like me, and there's someone worse off than me. And I think realizing that you're not alone, and that you can talk about it and get help, and that you can help others through this. So that was a big one. Showing up, as we talked about earlier, is a big one. I think we can fake a lot of things in this life, but you can't fake showing up. And
well, I think that's a little, when if someone loses someone, or whatever it is, and it's, sometimes I don't know what to do. Do you send flowers? That's why I was asking Stephen this question, because it's sometimes you get paralyzed by not knowing what to do, and is it too much? Is it not enough?
Yeah, first thing, show up. Just be there for them. Hug them. Tell them you're sorry. And understand that there isn't anything you can say that's going to make them feel better. So don't feel that pressure to say anything other than you're sorry for their loss, and hug them and hold them and sit there and be with them. If you want to be more proactive, you can mow their lawn if it's summer, because they're not going to have the energy for that. I had a guy mow my lawn for 3 months. We had friends come over and walk our dog. We had a food train set up by our community friends and church and everybody, and it lasted 1 year and 3 months, which was really incredible, with a meal showing up on our doorstep, every night. You can grocery shop for them. Do the things that they don't want to do, and just do them. Because if you ask them, they're going to be like, "Oh, no, I'm good. I don't need any help." But they need help.
You also said, say his name or her name.
Yeah, we told people immediately, like, we're going to talk about Jake, and there's gonna be pictures up on the wall, and we're gonna talk about the stories and remember the good times. And he's still a part of this family. I mean, and he shows up.
We're both on the MAD advisory board, and I appreciate that. Tell me what that work means to you and what you would like to share with people about, the initiatives.
Yeah, so obviously Mothers Against Drunk Driving, everyone hopefully knows their mission, which is to stop drunk driving. And it's certainly a major issue. Every 79 seconds, there's a car accident involving a death or a fatality that involves drunk driving. It's up 31% since 2019. And the reality is that 2 out of every 3 people are going to be impacted in some way by that. So it's pretty pervasive. And it's another way for me to help. The kids 16 to 20 are represent one third of the deaths. They're young drivers, they're inexperienced, they probably feel invincible. So I'm trying to help save lives. And whatever I can do to help MAD, I do. I speak, and now they've created MAD Sports, which is another way that they can get the message out to a younger population through games at the college and high school level, through student athlete ambassadors and influencers. So it's very positive. It's just another way to help. I don't want to see another parent like myself.
And you're having an event in May, which we should mention that you're starting the event.
So in partnership
with Kenny Mayne.
Yeah, Lindsay's kind enough to co-chair with Kenny Mayne, and there's going to be next May 18th. There will be a concert at the Fairfield Theater Company. Jake was born in New Orleans, so we're going to have some New Orleans musicians, 2 great ones, James Andrews and his jazz quintet, and then Anders Osborne. So that will be Sunday, May 18th. The next day, Monday the 19th, we're having a golf charity event, a celebrity event. There'll be a lot of athletes, coaches, media personalities, actors that will be participating. It's going to be at Brooklawn Country Club in Fairfield. We're just kind of formally announcing it now. MAD is putting together the art and the collateral, so we'll be getting all the who, what, when, where, how out there. So stay tuned.
My last question for you, you have mentioned that you have simplified your life since this, and that has made a big difference. Can you explain how? Yeah, so I ran across a quote from this man that Hassan al-Basri. He wrote it in 700 AD, and he said, this life is 3 days, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yesterday has come and gone. It's floated away like a leaf down a stream. What has happened. We can certainly learn from it, but we can't change it. And tomorrow's not guaranteed to any one of us. So why worry about what may or may not come into fruition? But today is what we have, and life is now, and it's about living in the moment, being present. It's about kindness. Marcus Aeneas Seneca said, wherever you see a human being, there's an opportunity for kindness. It's about recognizing we're all equals. It's about honoring that we're here to give unconditional love, to lift up and love each other. It doesn't matter what someone does. It doesn't matter what they can or can't do for us in this life. We're here for meaningful connection and not a conditional existence. And so I live my life day to day. It's hard to really plan too far ahead. And simplifying it like that has really helped. I've simplified a lot in my life. And I think it's just a natural fallout from it. Thank you so much for sharing so much. And I want to share that, you see my Post-its. I want to hear your questions, but there are so many quotes from yourself, from other people, though, as well, that are really cool to read in here, and just so many different types of themes, I think, that are so helpful. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, please, right over there.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. You moved us all. And I wanted to ask, how do you find joy now? What do you do to find joy in your life? Thank you for the question, and thanks for coming out. I find joy in nature. Just looking at a beautiful flower, looking up at the sky and the clouds, the simple things. It took a while, honestly, to find joy again. But
I had to honor that needed to let go, not of Jake, but of my suffering. And when I did that, I was able to see joy in more things. I see joy in Liam's growth. I see joy in my wife's eyes as she's made huge leaps and bounds from where she was 4 years ago. And I find joy in having April in our life. The little things, because they matter most.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Lindsay, for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
A couple of things. First, sorry for your loss. I mean, just a tremendous talk. I'm inspired to read the book, even though my name is Stephen and my son's name is Jake. So
Wow.
I don't know if I can get through this, but
Yeah.
one of the things that people talk about in terms of dealing with grief in this circumstance is forgiveness. Is that part of your journey? Or obviously, if you can't answer that, I'll understand if there's like a lawsuit or something, but
No.
and then I have a follow-up.
Yeah, that's a great question. Without spoiling the book, it is part of the journey for sure. Theologian Louis Smedes says to forgive is to discover that there was a prisoner and that you're the prisoner. And I recognized that the only way that I was eventually going to be able to fully walk on was to forgive everybody that was involved in the accident. And it didn't happen overnight, it didn't happen the first year. But I was able to arrive at a certain point where I decided to just forgive. And I do believe in the power of forgiveness, not just for others, but of yourself too. I wish there was more forgiveness on this planet. But for me personally, I can only speak to me personally, that's what I needed to do to walk on. Everyone, again, has to do their own thing. What has happened, I can't change it. So I could either be bitter, angry, or I could forgive and move on with my life, which I'm trying to do to help others.
Thank you. And just quickly, you talked about reading a lot. I don't know if you read the Dick Ebersol memoir.
Yeah.
So you'll know the context, I guess, right? The death of his 14-year-old son in a crash.
Yeah.
So a different circumstance, obviously, but you know what it did to his life and his journey and mission beyond that. So
Yeah.
I was going to recommend that. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and shortly after Jake died, Michael Lewis lost his daughter out in California. She and her boyfriend were driving, and I don't know if they'll ever get answers on this one, but all of a sudden they were on their way to Tahoe. They ended up in the wrong lane and were involved in a head-on collision with a truck. And that's the thing, death is indiscriminate, and there's no rhyme or reason. But one thing I've learned is not to fear it. I used to fear death. I no longer fear it. I don't believe death is the end. And I've seen enough in the last 4 years to know that Jake is around. So I'd kind of leave everyone with that. That's at least my take.
Wow. Yeah, and to follow up on the forgiveness, I just heard a sermon at Greens Farms Congregational Church where the pastor was talking about forgiveness and about just that point that it's not necessarily for the person that you're forgiving. It really is about forgiveness and how it makes you feel. I just thought that was very interesting. Go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to say I'm a child adolescent therapist, and I'm just so amazed at your attitude and the way you look at things. I have a client, I'm actually here with a friend who lost 2 sons, and he's never been through any grief counseling or anything, but I'm gonna get your book, obviously, and see if I can impart some wisdom from you to him. And I also had a sister-in-law who lost a son to suicide, and the husband said to her, "Why us?" And she said, "Why not us?" And I was thinking, like, with all the kids in the car, did you ever say, "Why my son?" You know, something like that.
Yeah, I think whenever something like this happens, you question everything about it. Mm-hmm. I actually, I blamed myself for a long time. I wasn't even there.
Right.
I had entrusted the care of my son to another parent. But again, as a father, my job is to protect my family, most especially my children, and I felt like I failed. And so I totally relate to that. And it took months for me to kind of get through that process. But things happen in life, and we're given free will, and we do with it as we want. And I think we're placed on this planet to be tested, and our choices and our experiences lead us to challenges, and we have that free will to decide what we're going to do, door A, door B, door C. And that's just what happened that day. I wish I could go back in time and change it, but I can't.
But you're just amazing. Like, your book is so inspirational. I'm going to buy it, and hopefully my friend will look at it, because him and his family have not done any grief counseling at all. But it's like he'll go to this. He said he went to Home Depot the other day, and he saw a container where one of his sons had killed himself and was on top of it, and that just triggered so much, anguish, reminded him of everything that he went through. They don't believe in therapy. They're kind of old-fashioned, but I think your book may help him, and I just think you're an amazing, amazing person.
Well, thank you, and I'm really sorry about your friend's loss. That's beyond tragic to lose two
kids,
boys.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2 kids. I hope the book does help him, and if he ever wants to talk, I'm available.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
That would be nice. Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, God bless him.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you so much for sharing everything tonight. It was very powerful. We're friends with Lindsay, and so I saw that she was interviewing somebody tonight. Had no idea you were a Gamecock. So our son is at South Carolina, and I asked him if he had heard of you, and he said, absolutely. They do a scholarship every year for his son named Jake, and he said Alex Herrera won it this year.
Yeah.
So as Lindsay said, everybody at school who's a football fan like my son seems to know it. So I asked my son Max, do you have any questions for Stephen? He said, yeah, how is Shane Beamer with the players off the field?
What you see is what you get. He really is something special to be a head football coach in the SEC. There are a lot of time demands, as Lindsay can attest, being a sports reporter. But Shane is just, he's got his priorities in order. He's really well balanced. He's super positive, very inspirational, keeps the boys focused on what they need to do, and is always lifting them up. I always joke with him that he and Jake are 2 brothers, kind of from the same tree, 2 branches from the same tree, right? They have so much in common, and it means the world to me that Shane has been so supportive of the scholarship and the families. Alex Herrera is a great kid. He's the kicker on the team this year. 6-year player, finally got a scholarship. Great family. He's a local kid from Columbia, South Carolina. I've had a chance to meet his family and hang out with them, and that's what makes it so meaningful, is getting to know the families and the young men and women, and having a relationship with them. It gives me, in a weird way, I guess I get to father more kids, and I kind of like that.
All right, good stuff. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Britt. We ran into Shane at a basketball game, and he was saying how he reaches out and connects often with Dawn Staley, the head basketball coach for the women, and how he leans on her for some of his leadership also, and I think they really share, which I thought was, wow.
She's a good one to lean on.
Well, she is. She just won the championship. Yep. Pretty amazing. Go ahead.
Hi. This is very nerve-wracking to get up and speak, but I felt compelled. You have a beautiful son, beautiful family. Of course, I am so sorry for your loss. A lot of things I'd like to ask and share or whatever, but you mentioned that April, your daughter, said she knew Jake, and do you mind elaborating on?
Yeah, she didn't know him personally. She knew of him.
Oh, okay.
She had heard about Jake and, his personality, and may have seen him at a party or something like that. She never had occasion to meet him.
So she was like living in Fairfield?
Yeah, she was in Shelton, splitting time between Shelton and the Bronx.
Okay. And the significance of the bear on the cover?
Yeah, so,
maybe that's in the book, so I don't want to be a spoiler
yeah.
about it, but I plan to buy it as well.
so-
As 3 copies, one for my children. And, yeah.
So the bear has a real big significance. I bought a necklace for my wife. I'm actually wearing it right now.
And Jake
there.
was wearing it in one of the photos, I think, right?
Jake was wearing it. So Jake came home from the mission trip and he wanted to wear it. So Kelly gave it to him and he was wearing it and he lost it about a month before the accident, screwing around with some friends over at the Pequot Library, and Kelly and the friends all went over, and Liam, they looked for it, couldn't find it. And the bear represents protection and courage and healing, and so he wasn't wearing it when he died. And Kelly and I went to the beach, Southport Beach, sometime in mid-September on a Wednesday, and we were just staring off into the drift, and she said to me, "I wish we knew somebody with a metal detector." And we're sitting on the beach like this, and I just happened to look to my right, and here comes a guy down the beach like this.
I love that.
And I'm like, "You mean like that?" So she sprinted over
Put
to
it out
him.
there.
She told him the story. We're trying to find this necklace. It's somewhere in the rough grass dirt of the backwoods of Pequot there by the parking lot. And he's like, I'll be happy to help you look sometime. He took the card or phone number and all the information down, and we went back to just sitting down. And about 45 minutes later, we heard this truck pull up behind us, and he's like, "Does now work?" And we're like, "Yes, sir." Oh. So we hopped in the car, and we were driving over there, and we literally live a half mile from there. I turned to Kelly, I said, "I think Jake's gonna help us find it." And we got there, and he broke out his metal detector, and we got on our hands and knees again, and we're scraping the grass and rustling it in the dirt, and all of a sudden, Kelly screamed, "I found it." And that was the first time she smiled in a month.
Really?
So we got the necklace back, which is great.
I
So
feel
the
like
bear
there's
means so much.
And then
because-
bears like was it South Dakota? Or
Yeah,
like
in the native
mission?
culture, the bear is very powerful. That represents the healing, the protection, and the fact that he didn't have that, I just felt like the bear should be on the cover.
You did a lot of reading in your grief. I've dealt with a lot of grief, ambiguous grief in my life, but I'm not going to go into that, but other grief. And I'm sure, so you've read a lot. I know you maybe you came across like Teddy Roosevelt, his story, and or maybe not, but he lost his wife and his mother a year apart on the same day, and that's what led him out to the West to heal and just be in nature, and that's what led to preserving all the national parks that we have today and enjoy. But anyway, I don't know if you were aware of that.
That's a beautiful story, yeah.
And it is amazing. But last thing I want to say, well, I'm a Penn Stater, but anyway, but I was raised in Westport, and since you're in the sports world, you probably know of Frank DeFord.
Yep.
And I used to actually babysit for their daughter, Alex. That shows how old I am. But and I moved back here with my family at the time, many years later, and ran into them at my church. And at the time, and I said, I remember your daughter. And the things you said, there's just so many things that I can relate to. The things you said about Jake, where it's like he knew or something. And I can say this from when Alex, I babysat her when she was like in first, second grade, and she used to dress up like a grown-up all the time. And she had, I don't know, I feel like children have such wisdom that's just unexplainable when they then die later or something, because, her older brother used to be really mean to her, and I'd say, tell him to stop. And she said, it's okay. She just had such an understanding about that. And I always reflected back that she just maybe knew she wasn't going to be around, and she really liked to dress up and kind of live through that. But anyway, when I ran into Carol and said, I just remember Alex, she was such a beautiful child. And I mean, like, this is like, I don't know, 40 years later, like just tears came right to her eyes. I mean, you go on, but you don't ever fully heal. I mean, the pain's always there, but you just learn away, right? So I just say thank you for all you're doing to really inspire all people who are dealing with pain, suffering, and grief and loss. It's really wonderful.
Thank you, yeah. And that's the thing, it's not, grief comes in many forms, right? It's you go through a divorce, a relationship fails, a financial crisis, you lose your job, you get a poor medical diagnosis. It's not just death. And I think we're all walking around with, I see everybody with an invisible backpack now. And in it is their own suffering. And I think if we could all look at each other with our backpacks on, it'd be a lot better society. So that's what I'm trying to get people to look at it like that, because you're not alone. And we can have more compassion for one another and kindness on this planet.
100%. Has that also strength? I mean, you have some kind of faith, it seems. Was your faith challenged but strengthened at the same time as time went on?
Yeah, so I was raised Catholic, and I joke that I'm a recovering Catholic. But my faith was questioned, certainly, but not for long. And my relationship with God is stronger than it's ever been, and entirely different than it's ever been. In
How so?
In a good way.
Sorry.
How so?
Yeah, how would you?
I think I have a better understanding of how everything works. And I've had some really mystical, mysterious, whatever words you want to use, things happen, enough of them to know that there's a connection that I can tap into. And I just read a great book by a doctor, and he talks about the God spot. He said we all have the God spot in our brain. It's the right temporal lobe, and it's the ability to tap into the mystery of the universe.
Wow.
Not to sound too woo-woo, but...
No. It's like the halo that you talk about.
Yeah, the sundogs.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you very much for your generosity of spirit and emotion and all the things that you've gone through. It's so helpful to, when you haven't gone through it, to hear like what you said, I'm sorry for your loss, to know that we can't help you that much, but at least we can give of ourselves from what's happened to you. My question is about, you talk about Kelly and your relationship and your marriage, and often when you hear stories like this, couples that go through loss end up breaking apart. And I'm just wondering, how has that changed your marriage? And, I understand your family part of it, but, how have you been able to stick together, and what's the adjustment that's had to be made, or kind of how has it evolved?
Well, it's like we're two trains on different tracks, often, at least as far as, at least the first 2 or 3 years. But we had enough love and respect to know that we were going to support one another through it. And our relationship is better than ever, stronger than ever. We share the deepest pain that a human being probably will ever endure. And she's the love of my life, and I'm a lucky man to have her. She's just an amazing mom, and I'm so happy that she has April now to mother as well, because Kelly has a lot of love to give. And we leaned on our therapist, we leaned on each other, and our therapist had coined a phrase that I love, and we use it a lot, and it's vigilant mercy. And he stressed that we needed to have vigilant mercy not only for each other, but for others, because people, while being well-intentioned, would say things that could land flat to a bereaved parent. And it was just having that vigilant mercy to understand that they meant well, but they just didn't say it well. Or another example is I got cut off the other day on I-95. Instead of honking the horn and giving them the bird and things I probably would have done 5 years ago, I just stopped and I thought, well, I guess that person's in a hurry and it must be an emergency.
I just wanted to highlight real quick is before we let you go, is there is a chapter that's called Family Ties, Friendships Matter. And the quote that you chose, right, by Walter Winchell, is that how you use? A real friend is one who walks in when the rest of the world walks out. And I just thought, I don't know, it's the lens to just understand the importance of those things, family, friends, and the simplicity of it is very powerful.
Yeah, and I've got friends here in the audience that have been incredible supporters. very involved in helping us endure some of the toughest, darkest days of our life. And they know who they are out there, but thank you. I love you guys.
Is there anything else that you would like to share, Stephen?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but.
We have covered a lot of ground. A lot of heavy, important, meaningful ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate your support.
No, thank you. Thank you for sharing and for letting me do this with you. So thank you to everybody for coming tonight. Again, the books are available over there for purchase. Stephen is willing to sign them. Is that accurate?
Happily.
Yep. But yeah.
I don't know if the autograph's worth anything, but.
No, but thank you so much for sharing so much and for helping so many people. And thank you guys all for coming. And those of you who tuned in streaming.